This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to journalist Janet Basurto. She's going to be talking to us about the potential for a civil war in Chiapas in Mexico, the area best known for the EZLN, the Zapatistas, but now there are new self-defense militias popping up to defend the area from drug cartels and what the self-defense militias believe are government paramilitary forces. If you like what we're doing, please do consider supporting us at patreon.com/popularfront. Okay, so I guess we should probably start with that the communique, right, that the EZLN put out. I know they're not exactly that active out there at the minute, but they kind of said, you know, there's a civil war starting in Chiapas. Like, what's happening? What is going on?
Yeah, so last week or in the middle of September, the Zapatistas released this statement, very dramatic, saying we're at the brink of war. Basically, they were denouncing the kidnapping of two of their members by the Orcao, and they went on to accuse this group, the Orcao, of basically being a paramilitary, political military organization that's just continuously perpetrating attacks, conducting kidnappings. So the majority of their statement was focusing on, the insecurity carried out by this group, but also the wider, disregard by the municipal government. And they basically stated that if this continues, Chiapas will turn into a civil war. All of these different indigenous groups are tired of being marginalized, of having of people being kidnapped, people being murdered, and the government's not doing enough, not launching enough investigations. So this kind of started, what we're seeing right now with different defense organizations coming out and also issuing, their own statements. So this is what we're kind of seeing at the moment.
Right, and there's been, you just mentioned the self-defense groups there. A lot of these are starting right, but they're not actually anything to do with, the Zapatistas, the EZLN. These are other groups, right?
Yeah, and they mainly came out. So one of the trigger that started all of this was the June 6th elections. I mean, these were some of the most violent elections that we've had in modern Mexico history. There were about 35 candidates killed nationwide, 89 if you actually count like the political aides and the workers. So this basically jump-started in Chiapas because a lot of the mayors and a lot of the governors that were being elected were actually accused of having links to organized crime. Many of the mayors in Chiapas were just, it was not necessarily a democratic process, more so a passing of the kind of the baton. Many of these newly elected mayors were the husbands of, the former mayors, or were the spouses of former mayors. So what basically happened with the first self-defense militia, which is Los Machetes, or El Machete, that came out of Pantelo, they basically are denouncing the newly elected mayors having links to a criminal organization called Los Herreras. These guys have been accused of perpetrating assassinations, extortions. So what they were basically coming out and saying was that we're going to impede this guy from being sworn in, which was actually on Friday, on October the 1st. He had to be sworn in secret a day before the actual date. So, everything was kind of highly insecure at that moment. But that was basically their major demand, is we don't want this guy to continue the insecurity that he's already, that they have already maintained for the last 20 years. And we're going to do anything possible to basically impede. And from then on, we saw two other groups. One of them actually just last night released their video. So this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the effects of the election. Many of them claim or attribute them to being completely undemocratic, bought by organized groups, organized crime, and they consider them illegitimate. So this is one of their, basically major alerts here.
Right, and what is the situation with the cartels now in this area?
So we have the two major cartels, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco. We've seen several clashes by these two in a couple of months ago, but what's primarily concerning here is kind of the local criminal organizations, like the lower end. We have one called Los Herrera, which is, what El Machete was complaining about. These guys have been in Chiapas for over 2 decades. They're very linked to the municipal government. They've actually accused of financing the government, embezzling from, the public resources. And the former, the head of this organization was imprisoned about 2 years ago, I think, on homicide charges, but he was the judge. He was a municipal judge. So it's this continual process of everybody's embedded in these linkages, in these in this kind of illicit arena of sorts. And now what's going to complicate everything even more is that the Jalisco cartel are becoming a little bit more active in the region. They're trying to basically take out the dominance that the Sinaloa cartel had. So, unfortunately, we're going to still see definitely more bloodshed.
Right, and I know, obviously the EZLN are saying, there's going to be a civil war, and there's going to be clashes and whatever. But what are they actually doing? Because we're seeing all these new self-defense groups, the machetes, and then this other group, but the EZLN, from what I've seen, I could be wrong, but they don't really seem to be doing anything other than kind of, releasing communiques.
Yeah. They've turned into a civil society organization. The areas that I have visited, Zapatista control, autonomous regions, they've hold a lot of community, engagement. They have doctors to see, some people who don't have access to medical health care. So they've kind of become this de facto second government that's a little bit more withdrawn from the active, fighting. So they've devolved a little bit into that, which I think, it's given them a very high profile still. And what I think is also valuable about the EZLN, despite them not really engaging in anything, is that them releasing the statement about, Chiapas being on the brink of war really brought the spotlight to Chiapas. This has been going on for months now, and domestic media hasn't necessarily been paying attention, and the international media also hasn't really drawn its eyes to it. So them releasing this very almost dramatic, press release was the impetus that brought all these eyes here. So in a way, they've become kind of this beacon of, hey guys, we're getting a little bit massacred over here. Please pay attention to us. And that's kind of, an extension of the value and the profile that they've kind of carried on.
Sure, but considering they have carved out this kind of left libertarian autonomous region for themselves, and they've done a great job at it, don't get me wrong, but surely then that means they kind of have a responsibility as an armed force still, you know what I mean, as they did in, what was it, 84, surely they still kind of should be out there, or maybe they are, I don't know. It just seems weird to me that, having read all about EZLN and Zapatistas, now it's the kind of, I don't know, community militias that are not really anything to do with the Zapatistas forming to say that, they're going to defend from the government and the cartels and whatever.
I mean, and still in some of their statements, I completely agree with you, with, that assessment that they've kind of gone back a little bit on their active confrontations. However, they do still in their press release add that, we will rise up at any cost, give our lives for it. But, again, it is just a press release. We, at least when I was there in San Cristobal de las Casas and visited some of the Zapatistas autonomous areas, I did see more of them kind of promoting the civil society organization rather than the militancy or the and I think what's also relevant here is that because they are such high profile, they also are very high profile for our armed forces. So I think they also have to maintain this very delicate balance between doing too much and having the entire government rein in on them as they did in 1991, or kind of also offer the this status quo and allow other organizations or other self-defense groups to kind of do the hard work.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. It's like at the end of the day, they've got to keep what they've built together. I do understand that. I was just kind of, I don't know, I guess I was surprised at seeing how many of these self-defense groups have come up. What do you think about those groups? I know in America, I know in Mexico, a lot of the time, the kind of auto defense groups are actually just linked to like cartels and whatever, they're kind of there for show. How serious are these groups, do you think? I know you showed me that pitch the other day. They built a fucking IED in a bin. You know what I mean? Like they seem to at least have some kind of skills. What do you reckon?
Right. It's very hard to tell at the beginning now. I mean, if you see the footage of like for specifically El Machete, they had, there's videos and I'll send them to you so you can post them if you want. There's videos of them being like deputized basically by, the community in Pantelo. It's very hard to say, but, these guys don't look very well trained. Many of them are carrying machetes. Only a few of them have arms. But, it's kind of a ragtag team. And, so it's very difficult to assess like how much of a fight they'll be able to put. Unfortunately, I mean, like when we assess it to like these other criminal organizations that have been doing this for the past, 2 decades. So in terms of how serious they are, I do think they're very committed. They've also like tore down the municipal, the city hall in Pantelo. And they've raided a few homes here and there, but, it's very difficult to assess in response to how these groups eventually turn into cartels. I mean, this is something that we continuously see across the board, which is very unfortunate. Like, for example, with the Orcao, the group that the ECLN basically claims kidnapped their comrades. These guys started as, also this kind of a union of coffee growers to demand better coffee prices. They were actually allied with the Zapatistas when they came out in 98. And then eventually in the 90s, when the Zapatista crackdown happened, they were seen as caving in to the intimidation by the government, and then eventually seen as allied to the government in exchange for, political or financial favors. And now what we have of them is that they're in an active conflict with the Zapatistas. So we see this all across the board, where, in Michoacan, this is also very relevant with like the self-defense militias that have come out to fight the Knights Templar, but also eventually became a new cartel. So, I can only say that time will tell. I know it's a cop out of an answer, but it's very, very prevalent here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is what it is. In terms of the government, then, obviously cartels are around and there's these kind of incursions and then there's criminal groups. But what about the actual government? Like, what's the main issue with what they're doing in the region at the minute?
And specifically Chiapas, I mean, they accuse the government of not doing anything, actually. These newly elected mayors, some of them have been accused of direct links with criminal organizations, with, embezzling millions of pesos from the municipal government. And these guys don't see them intervening enough. There were clear evidence during the elections that there was vote buying going on. People were stuffing ballot boxes, they were stealing the ballots, and it got very little attention by the federal government. So that's also another kind of grievance that these communities maintain, is that they're so it might as well not exist there. And so one of the petitions also for these guys in rejecting the entire government is that they just want to implement their own kind of indigenous municipal council, kind of extending this era of autonomy for them, because, the government just doesn't really seem to give a shit.
Right. And obviously the government being AMLO, right, they're meant to be the kind of, oh, we're the progressive ones, we're going to kind of sort things out. From everybody, literally every spectrum people I know in Mexico, everybody's just saying the same thing. They're not doing anything. Have they released even a statement on the situation? Because, in this region specifically, it could get really violent. You know what I mean? I know the whole of Mexico is violent, but, well, not the whole of it, a lot of it, but it's a different kind of violence. You know what I'm saying? It's a different aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. I have not seen anything directly, the president or the defense secretary releasing anything specifically about Chiapas or what's going on now. But for example, in Guerrero, which is also very similar to Chiapas, there was this other militant group that released this video of, them executing 20 people on camera, basically rivals. The video came out about last week. The president issued a statement basically saying despite this, it's actually getting very safe now. So there's a lot of scapegoating the situation. He does have we do see him continuously try to say that the situation is a lot safer, that we're making progress in terms of, lowering our homicide rates, which is actually not saying very much because we're still having one of the most violent years in our history. So, it's very hard, it's very difficult to actually rely on the federal government, especially when, the situation also in Michoacan and Guanajuato, these are states that are undergoing extreme levels of violence. And the president continuously says that we will resolve this with dialogue and diplomacy. And so this is also a sign for, the residents in Chiapas, that they see the extreme levels of violence everywhere else and nothing is happening. So it's almost like they have to rely on their own, own protection, own self-defense here. And that's also the trend that we're seeing nationwide. He has a policy called, and a lot of people make fun of this, the abrazos no balazos, the hugs, not bullets. And he coined this during the election.
I can't believe people make fun of that.
Yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah.
And, this was an 8-point security plan to kind of address the triggers of why people go into organized crime. He says that we need to address kind of the social welfare of the people to make sure, address poverty so that, this youth doesn't go into organized crime. And while that sounds like a great policy, that's also a long-term policy. There's no exhibition of what a short-term policy is to address these crises. And unfortunately, that has also left a vacuum to where, the Jalisco cartel has just grown massively in the last 2 years. And it's unfortunate that this is almost a consequence that we're seeing. So, the way that we're seeing Chiapas now, it's almost like a real time example of, the gradual evolution of how these states spiral out of control and become areas overrun by crime. Areas where cartels have gotten so large, it's become nearly impossible for security forces to fight them or contain them. And, this is almost, Chiapas is like the very early examples of how we ended up with states like Michoacan and Guanajuato and Zacatecas. So, I understand, we need to have a spotlight on Chiapas. We need to kind of address these problems as early as possible. But, there's not much appetite from the federal government. And we could argue that it's lack of awareness or, complicity with organized crime. But I simply think that the problem right now is so large to handle. I mean, addressing, how massive these cartels have gotten, it's beyond me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems to me at least that the cartels are like more powerful than the government on in a lot of ways. And the Zapatistas, as well as they've done, they're saying, well, there's going to be a civil war. I mean, really, if the cartels move in there, I mean, who has a chance? I mean, you've got the machetes where they've got like, Los Machetes. They have literally machetes. And you're talking about cartels that have literally armored personnel vehicles. You know what I mean? Like, how the fuck? Like, which cartels is it specifically in the area that, if this so-called civil war does kick off, who is it that's going to be moving in?
Yeah, I mean, we already have the Jalisco, the Sinaloa cartel, and like these lower wings. I mean, it's just gonna be a bloodbath. I mean, you're absolutely right in pointing out that they're very ill-equipped to handle these massive problems. In many of these groups as well, there's children. Little 14, 15-year-old guys like wagging around little machetes. It's unfortunate, but that's also a sign, of just how abandoned, these communities have gotten and how pervasive organized crime has basically been allowed to thrive. So it is just, it's difficult to comprehend.
I spoke to some people that were like, not necessarily anti-EZLN and that, but they were saying, oh, there's rumors online that the EZLN are kind of working with cartels in the region. Have you heard anything like that?
I have not, but for example, addressing like how they get firearms. For example, it's illegal to have a firearm in Mexico, or at least to legally carry a firearm. So just by that, you will have to purchase it by a trafficker or by, organized crime. So I can see how like those lines are very blurred in terms of them actually collaborating and working with any cartels. I personally have not heard that, or at least enough evidence on that. But, just firearms, for example, is enough to say that they are colluding, or the acquisition of firearms.
Right. I guess it's like, if the devil runs the region and you need something from them, you know what I mean? What you're going to do. Yeah. No, I see what you mean.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Has the cartels addressed any of this? I know that's kind of a weird question, but from the social media stuff that I've been looking at, specifically with the New Generation cartel and them guys, like they seem to address quite a lot of things, like, kind of publicly, as if they were a state almost, online. So have they said anything about this situation in Chiapas?
For specifically the elections and this right now, no. However, there's been a lot of flooding. We passed through like 2 hurricanes in the last couple of months. So there's been a lot of flooding and in these communities, and because, they live in extreme poverty, half of the houses and homes are falling apart. So they have launched campaigns of, distributing mattresses and distributing beds and, giving refrigerators out to these communities. So, there's a very active wing of the Jalisco cartel engaging in, this social responsibility aspect. It's a very strong sense of them trying to win hearts and minds. So we see this after, a lot of disasters. For Mother's Day, they started, they went out, I think this was in Guanajuato or Michoacan, I can't remember where, but the Jalisco cartel was giving out flowers, and they were giving out microwaves and, all kinds of appliances for all these mothers. And the running joke, which is very dark, was like, here's a microwave, let me get your son, let me take your son, basically,
Christ.
So, we do see heavy activity on their social kind of responsibility side. And it's very unfortunate because these are facets that the government should be fulfilling. Especially around these disaster areas where the communities are already impoverished, already vulnerable, and they're not providing enough. They're not fulfilling their role as providers, and they're basically allowing these illicit organizations to fill that gap. And what ends up happening there is that they start building a very, very strong social shield. Would you rather go against the cartel that's giving you a mattress, or, support the police, who's probably also very corrupt? It's a very difficult place to be in for these communities. So, that's also making the problem so much bigger and so much more violent.
It sounds like Mexico is really bordering on just being a failed state at this rate. You know what I mean?
Yes, it's a narco state. I mean, and it's a very interesting contrast because, in Mexico City, it's a thriving financial capital, and it's still, relatively safe if you know where to go. But it's a very interesting contrast. It's like Mexico City is probably like one of the only, international hubs that's still maintaining this idea that Mexico is doing great. And it's very unfortunate that for all these surrounding communities, I mean, also don't get me wrong, there's a lot of tourist destinations that are absolutely great. I don't want to drive anyone from coming to Mexico. But, the reality is that, these destinations are being protected because they're also cash cows, and there need to be, some sort of security there, but also the, overwhelming parts of Mexico are just being abandoned.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying completely. Don't get me wrong. Like we're not knocking Mexico as a country and the people, but you're right. Like you cannot just ignore like, oh well, Mexico City is doing well. People are exaggerating. Like no, like half the country is taken over and run by like some of the most brutal, bloodthirsty cartels that exist. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, it's nice if you've got money and you live in the city, but if you don't, you're in big trouble. It's not great. You spent some time visiting the Zapatistas, right? What was it, like last year or something? Were people there kind of aware of the situation back then, or what?
In terms of the election violence, or
well, just I guess just the impending kind of problems that were coming to the region.
Impending doom, yeah.
Yeah.
I did get that sense. I mean, it was also, when did I go? In 2019, so it was very well before the elections, because the election period was incredibly heavy. Sorry, I went in 2020. So this is where we started seeing everything pick up. But regardless, there is a lot of suffering. It's one of the most impoverished states in our country. So just by that, you did see a lot of desperation and a lot of need that one group or another is going to fulfill that gap. So while I didn't see it outright, there were very clear signs that, something was going to trigger mass amounts of violence. A lot of the municipal government also for decades has been accused of being linked to organized crime. So you did also see that becoming a trigger And yeah, I mean, just a very superficial observation, but I just spent most of my time talking to Zapatistas. I mean, they were, as I mentioned before, they were kind of just running their little community programs. I went to one of their autonomous areas where they just basically had a health clinic, and they were taking in residents who, didn't have access to other medical care, and that were using that as kind of like their little de facto, community center. So that's what I saw more. But that there were definitely signs. You could see that by the levels of poverty and how any group would be able to come and usurp that kind of role as a change maker.
It's a shame. In terms of this new militia, I think literally 24 hours ago they kind of released their video where they're all like pointing guns at each other's head by accident, which wasn't a great sign, but it is what it is, they got heart. I respect that. What were they saying exactly? Maybe I know you kind of mentioned it, but maybe just give us an idea of who they are and what they were saying.
Yeah, so these guys are they call themselves the Fuerzas Armadas, the armed forces of the Simojovel town, and they're basically directing their message to the newly elected mayor called Gilberto Martinez, who is going to assume the post after, his wife was a former mayor. So they're also accusing him of being extremely corrupt. They didn't directly attribute him to any links to organized crimes, at least in this video. And I haven't done enough research. Sorry about that. It just came out last night. So I haven't done enough research on the mayor. But they just accused him of, corruption. And they listed 7 demands, which was, basically respect for our, the indigenous people. We don't want any more diversion of the public resources. And then the main one, which is what all these other self-defense groups are saying, is that we want to expel, the narcos, the drug traffickers, the armed traffickers. They have zero tolerance for drug trafficking. So this is a commonality in all of these groups that have come out. It's just an outright opposition to, what they call the Narco Council, which is addressing, organized crime, but also the political arena that supports that, or allows it basically to thrive. So this is what these guys are saying as well. This is what their 7 demands were. And then they concluded the video with saying, if these demands are not met, then we will rise in action. They didn't specify what that action was. But of course, I mean, also, like you said, they're accidentally pointing guns at each other. So in terms of, the confidence of their organization and capabilities and, discipline and training, that's something that we're going to have to see.
Right, yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to mock these guys. Anyone that wants to, fight against what they want to fight against, sure, I got a lot of respect for them for, they got heart, like I said. But the thing is, I'm just thinking when you compare it, for example, to, the new generation cartel, Jalisco or whatever, they are well trained. They literally look like soldiers. You know what I mean? It's just one of these ones where it just seems not to say that it's impossible. I mean, look at Afghanistan, for example, but it's just not on the same level. You know what I mean? It just seems like, I don't know, man. It doesn't seem like a recipe for success. However, if you look at the Los Machetes. They have a lot of members. You know what I mean? They seem to have a lot of local support. Do you think that's genuine?
Yeah, I mean, they have so actually, a point you brought up to address first is that you're absolutely right. These guys are farmers. This is also what we need to remember, is that these guys weren't, trained professionally or are equipped professionally. These are guys that just, by the need of their community. So I completely agree with you, is, they're waving around machetes, and they probably, I want to hope, or I think, for the state, we want to hope that they'll know what to do. But yeah, these are farmers going against, some of the best equipped narcos in the country. In terms of the genuine support of El Machetes, in the video they brought in, so they released a video where basically they were like celebrated and deputized. They had kind of a community gathering where these guys were lined up, carrying their weapons, either sticks, guns, or machetes, with a little green bandana and the Los El Machetes t-shirt. It was a full, it was a packed gathering. Excuse me. I don't know how many people went out to see them, but it was estimated that it was around 100 men that were, on the ranks of El Machete. They had their little kind of ceremony, and they all agreed on what the mandate was, which basically combating the incursion of organized crime and expelling the hitman. And they kind of had their little congratulatory event there. But I do think it is genuine. But again, these are some of the earliest groups that we've seen. So actually, one of the, and I had completely forgotten about this, sorry. When they first came out with their declaration, which was back in July, when they first issued their opposition to the newly elected mayor, they basically launched several raids around the community and said, we're going to go and pick off, these hitmen that are, allegedly linked to Los Herreras. So they basically raided a couple of homes, set fire to cars, motorcycles. They just completely ransacked this area, and they ended up detaining 27 suspected Herrera members. So they have conducted their little operations here.
That's quite impressive. But what do they do with them afterwards? Like, they detained them. They're a vigilante group. I understand the area. You need that in an area like that. But what do they do? Kill them, or?
They're still allegedly held.
Okay, having a little dirt nap, I imagine. Yeah.
I don't
know.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But so what this new elected mayor is basically saying is like, I'm going to go rescue them, and so that's one of his like swearing in duties. But as far as the last information that I've heard is that they're still being held.
So the new mayor, he said he's going to rescue who? The guys that are held?
Yes. So guys that El Machete took.
So I can imagine. Sorry, I keep saying Los Machetes. It's El Machetes, right? You can tell I don't speak Spanish. So he's basically, in a way, I guess in their eyes, he's siding with the cartel, the mayor, I mean.
Right. So this is a question, right? So these guys have been linked to Los Herreras. I mean, El Machete brought out before their detention, they issued some photos basically saying, trying to prove or at least signal as evidence that these guys that were detained were members of Los Herreras. Now, family members of these guys have come out and said, you guys have the completely wrong men. These guys have no affiliation whatsoever to Los Herreras. And then the mayor is simply saying, these are our citizens. We have to go rescue them. So, there's different narratives that are coming. You can see how convoluted. Because we have to acknowledge that, it's very easy, especially in these communities, to get into a situation where there's just a public lynching, where someone is accused of being part of some network here or there, or, we had last week, there were 2 men that were accused of trying to steal a little girl, and they were just lynched in the middle of the municipal palace and set on fire alive. So you can also see how, these situations spiral out of control very, very quickly. And I think that's also another point of the narrative where the mayor is saying no, let's slow down. These guys are innocent or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously always the issue with vigilantism, but I think the issue is as well when you're in a place like where they are, and the police are just, I mean, they're not much better. They're not, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. It must be a really difficult situation. I mean, how do you even? I guess I'm not surprised that these groups are popping up. You know what I mean? Now you've kind of explained what's going on there.
No, absolutely. I mean, these are all signals to, how we've gotten to where we are. And this is also just decades of, corruption by the police, decades of distrust in them. So absolutely. I mean, you get into this very, very easy vigilante like terrain. And there's, also very difficult to get out of that.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thanks very much. That's been really interesting. Is there anything else you want to mention before we go?
Yeah, just one last thing. I know that
Sure.
we've been focusing on Chiapas, but as we said, this violence is not isolated to Chiapas. I think despite the levels of insecurity and increasing violence that we're talking about here, as unfortunate as it is, the violence is relatively low in comparison to the rest of the country. And I'm not saying that to minimize it in Chiapas, but also to put it into perspective that, there is a collective fatigue in this nation of just what a deep problem we have gotten. And it's so difficult to focus our attention, on addressing one hotspot because there's so many all across the country. So, if somebody is interested in, Mexican politics or conflict, there's definitely a lot of areas to explore here because there's a lot of turmoil.
Yeah, definitely. What's the situation with like reporters now? Obviously, I know a lot of local reporters, very sadly they end up just murdered, what I mean, by cartels. In terms of, I don't know, like if someone wanted to report on like El Machetes or whatever, like how possible is that these days?
I think you have to be very selective about the groups that you want to
Yeah.
go into. I mean, a lot of the reporters that I talk to, that I'm friends with, I know that there's areas that they just will definitely not touch. When it comes to organized crime, there is a pervasive idea that you don't want to expose too much, and I know that almost sounds counterproductive to the ethics of journalism, but at the same time we are talking about people's security. So
Of course, yeah.
There is a big sense that we're almost losing the free press, and we're losing also the motivations of why people would want to report on this, and why freelancers would want to get involved into this anyway, because the cost of entry is so high. Sometimes you end up paying with your life. I mean, they just murdered another journalist last week. I can't remember what state, but this is also a very frequent thing. Mexico is one of the deadliest countries to be a reporter in. One of also the consequences of this rising violence and the decrease in the free press and reporters is that we're also going to start seeing major blackouts, and we're also going to start seeing less and less coverage about what's going on. I do a lot of reporting on Michoacan, and also having people want to talk to me is very, very difficult. A lot of them just want to talk off the record. So it's just a very, very difficult, situation here on both sides. The people that are providing information, because they also don't want to, sustain those consequences, but also the people that are reporting on the situation. But I mean, if you want to go talk to El Machete, I mean, yalla.
Me, I don't know. I think I'd stick out a bit, you know what I mean? I don't know, maybe.
I'll do the work then.
Okay, great. All right. Speaking of your work, where can people find it? Your Twitter, everything like that.
You can find me on Twitter. I'll actually, after today, I'll go back and post some of the videos about this conversation just so people can get some context.
Brilliant, yeah.
I'm on Twitter at Janet, Janet _ Basurto, Basurto.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was Janet Basurto speaking about the potential for serious conflict in Chiapas in Mexico. Very interesting, an area worth keeping your eye on if you're at all interested in the Zapatistas, the EZLN, and vigilante forces in Mexico. Throughout that, annoyingly, I was calling El Machetes Los Machetes because I'm an idiot, whatever, and also said the EZLN rose up in 1984. Wrong, it's 1994. There you go. Too much militia forces going around in my brain. If you like what we're doing here at Popular Front, please do consider supporting us on the Patreon. That's patreon.com/popularfront. You get monthly Patreon only bonus episodes, access to the community Discord, Patreon only conflict journalism study series that is too cool for J School, narrated articles, early access to new episodes, documentaries premiere first on Patreon. There's extra video content, discount codes for Popular Front merchandise, loads of stuff there. Patreon.com/popularfront. If you want to support us a different way, go to popularfront.co/support. This episode was sponsored by Oracle Coffee Shop in Portland, Oregon, USA. They're an independent coffee business selling only fair trade products. See them at 3875 Southwest Bond Avenue 97239. Tell them that Popular Front sent you. The episode is also sponsored by Propagandopolis, an outlet selling and writing about historical conflict propaganda from around the world. You can buy prints at propagandopolis.com. Use the promo code POPULARFRONT10 for a 10% discount. Also, there is a Popular Front range of posters on there. You'll see it on the front page, propagandopolis.com. If you want to follow us on socials, Instagram at popular.front, Twitter at popularfront_. We've started using the Twitter now to kind of keep everybody updated on the world in conflict as we do with the Instagram. So yeah, check that out. youtube.com/popularfront, the website www.popularfront.co, and of course the patreon.com/popularfront. If you want to follow me, it's at Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. My website, jakehanrahan.com. You can see all of my work there. The music in this episode, the intro was by Home, and as always, the outro was by Sam Black. You can follow him on Instagram at samblack.jpeg, so samblack.jpeg. Or I don't know why he didn't choose .wav, actually. That would have been way smarter, or .mp3. Come on, Sam. Yeah, and you listen to his music at, samblackpf.com. Thank you to the high tier Patreons. Thanks for making all of this possible. They are Adam P, Elise Middlefar, Jess, Louis, David McManus, Joaquin Williamson Holt, Udoye Travis, Tom Petrie, James Lyons, Kate, Lisa Milgram, Bradley Davies, Brendan Crave, Peter Hesher, RX, A. Nicole, Travis Lieberman, Cherry, Ben Marshall, Dallas Dunn, MJ, K. Glitter Vulcan, Meredith Waters, Bethany Swoveland, Adam H, Larson 8669, Karante, Bjorn Kirsten, Diamond Steen, Michael O'Connor, Zach Picard, Todd Cravens, Nicholas Butter, Ron Swanson, JD, Jav, Ian Froese, James Cully, Tynan Daly, Ethan Fitzmadrid, Ed Coulthard, Mike Barone, Ben, Liam Williams, Chris Cusimano, Degenerate Zero Alpha, Giorgio Arani, DR, Trey Nance, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Amelia Me, Nawa Ease, Nate Van Dor, Christina Rivetti, Freya Northman, Ali Hunter, Bill Wilson, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Anthony Kabarek, Dan Dunham, Fletcher Tate, Chad Walker, Diana Gorvanek, Lawrence Abrahams, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Axel Iverson, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Moritz Zumbul. Thank you all so much. If you want to support us, patreon.com/popularfront.